Alright, I was going to do a World War III, but everything in the world seems to be calm and fine. Bankers have been arrested. All the psychopaths have seemed to have called away from the war rhetoric, so it looks like everything's going fine. There's nothing to worry about whatsoever. No, don't worry. We're always moments of being away from being blown off the planet, and today is no exception. So, I've been, kind of watching what's been unfolding in the last past week or so. We're really at, I got so much to cover on this one that I don't like to cover every little thing every day because, I like to wait till I see it build into something that you can really, really see clearly, connect the dots, like I've been doing on these. And I always tell people, don't be afraid to watch some of my older World War III updates, even if they're a couple of years old. Some of the stuff I've been saying back then is relevant now. I'm going to start with China has just bought a stock exchange in the United States, something maybe New York Stock Exchange or something. Not Wall Street, but something along that line. So they just did that. Iran has just ditched the U.S. dollar, meaning they're not going to sell their oil in U.S. currency, which is the same thing that got Muammar Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein killed. Maybe some other things in there too, but that's the big one, right? On top of that, Russia and China are now the two. Russia's China's biggest oil trading partner, and so I'm sure Iran will get in on that at some point too. But basically, they've just bypassed Saudi Arabia. The Russians have just basically ditched Saudi oil they're taking the crown from the Saudis for oil to China. Now I'm sure China will buy oil from everybody, but you can see them moving away. Sorry, a little dry here, but there's also, while this is going on, our three stooges are out there. Your Henry Kissinger, who went and visited Putin. Again, every time he goes visit Putin, you never hear what the meeting was about. And Kissinger is one of the big players in global disaster. He's one of the most evil men on the planet. Him, George Soros, and of course our other lunatic that was in the basement that Ronald Reagan told not to let out of the basement, is Zebru Brzezinski. Well, he's out there talking about nuking, doing preemptive strikes on Russia. This guy is just a complete nightmare of a disaster. He's the one who wrecked Afghanistan. He wrecked. He's this guy, Iraq. These guys are the main three guys that seem to be doing the bidding of, and who's above them, I don't know, but they do call the shots for the new American century policy and U.S. foreign policy. Kissinger seems to be doing strange things the last past couple of years, where he's saying things like Israel will no longer exist as a country in 10 to 15 years. George Soros, about a year or so ago, was talking about how China must be the new economic growth for the future, and then a couple of weeks ago he's talking about how we're going to go to war with China, and how he's also out there pretending that, he had no idea that this was coming, but it looks like the next economic collapse is going to be 10 times worse, 9 to 10 times worse than the last one. So we're talking extinction level event for a lot of people around the world. Might hit here last, but if you're in the United States and over here in Canada as well, remember, we do 80% trade with the United States, but you also have to keep in mind that China, again, they're buying as much gold as they can to back their currency, which is now a reserve currency. This is happening extremely fast. I mean, this is past tense stuff we're talking about. Not what they're going to do, but what they are doing. And this is putting us into a very scary trajectory. And I'm not fear-mongering, I'm just keeping it real. So we know North Korea fired off one of its big pop rockets there last week on Saturday or Sunday. I think it was Saturday. Last Saturday from the making of this video, and they're talking about firing another rocket, basically doing a fifth nuclear test and stuff like that. When they're going to do this, I'm not exactly sure. They're kind of a bit unpredictable on their timelines, but the thing is they're doing it now. Apparently, that rocket launched some sort of a satellite for the North Koreans. What that could be, who knows, right? It's like, it could be a weapon, it could be a communication satellite, a spy satellite, it could be many things. It could be Sputnik 2, but they did launch it. Now, Japan is still standing by its rhetoric of, if anything comes too close to us, we're shooting it down. So again, Japan is on kind of, not red alert, but high alert for North Korea, so that if North Korea launches any missile that goes their way, they're shooting it down, same with the South Koreans. While this is going on, where the really hot spot right now seems to be playing out is definitely Syria. Turkey is gone, I think, full retard on this one. They want to invade about a 30-mile strip along the border of Turkey and Syria and move in quite substantially far in, which will put them in proximity of the Russian airbase, which you can pretty much figure out what could possibly happen there. But it gets worse than that. They're not going in to fight ISIS. It sounds like pretty much openly they're admitting they're going in to fight alongside ISIS. Again, moderate rebels, right? So in other words, they're going in to fight Assad. Pretty much that's what they're saying. On top of this, you may have Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Jordan is kind of on the fence. They always kind of have been, and I don't think Israel's going to jump in on it, but you know they're going to be in there somewhere. Now the thing about this is the statement that was said from some Syrian commanders is that if they come in, and the Iraqis might be coming in too, but the Iraqis are actually coming in to fight ISIS. So at some point the Iraqis are going to have to choose. Now they know they're in a rock and a hard place, but they have to choose. But the Syrian generals and Assad said, you know, don't send your guys in because they're going to be slaughtered in, you know, you're going to be sending a lot of body bags back to Turkey. Now the thing is why would Turkey do this? Other than the obvious that they're batshit crazy. Well, it's simple. If they can overthrow Assad's troops, it makes the claim for NATO to go in because Assad once again will have lost control of the country, meaning that they can no longer handle the situation themselves, therefore the international community must come in. Now you have to understand there's stuff going on in Syria. It's not about the women and children or Assad being a dictator. They didn't care about him for how many years, and all of a sudden out of nowhere they care about him? No, there's definitely a lot of things. If you've been following this channel, you get an idea of some of the things that they're after, but there might be other things that we don't know about yet. But we do know that it is the stepping stone to going after Iran. And again, once they overtake Iran in the Middle East, it's pretty clear after that Russia and China are next. So this is why the Russians and the Chinese are kind of, well, the Russians are over it now. They're definitely backing Assad. But another thing you'll have to keep in mind is, and if we go back to 2012, I've been saying this since 2012, they're going to throw the Saudis under the bus. And look what's happening to them now. So this stuff is pretty easy, because remember, the Saudis screwed themselves by saying they were possibly going to sell oil outside the US dollar by the year 2022, 2025, something like that. So there will be no more Saudi Arabia by that time. Why? Because it didn't work for Saddam, it didn't work for Gaddafi, they didn't have Russian support. If Gaddafi would have been smart, he would have got Russian support before they did that. But also overthrowing Gaddafi is pretty much, and the US is trying to make as much, you know, they're getting everything ready to go and invade Libya. The idea is to get those migrants to get into Europe, to crash the European economies, to blame it on the migrants, etc., etc. There's a whole bunch of agendas here, right? So it's all being orchestrated. But the thing is the Russians are stepping up the game in Syria big time by bringing in some frontline fighters. Now those S-400 missile systems are there. They are a threat. They are being discussed by NATO. They don't know quite what to do about them. The Russians have stated to the Turks, look, if you go near anything of ours, we're shooting it down. You know, they're pretty much, maybe not that plain a language, but they will defend their assets, you know, to the fullest degree in Syria. So with the Turks, they're still in, as far as I know, they're still at situation orange, which means their pilots at any given notice can be scrambled to shoot down Russian fighters, and they've been given the green light to shoot down Russian fighters without any basic what you call it, you know, permission from NATO or anybody else. So they can go, they got the green light to do this. So what could possibly go wrong, right? Now, on top of that, Turkey's calling the Kurds terrorists, and we see there's all kinds of uprisings and crackdowns. The Turks are basically, you know, invading homes, kicking in doors, calling the Kurds terrorists, and the United States is not quite going along with that. So it's kind of, again, U.S. foreign policy in complete, utter disaster. But it's, again, order from chaos, right? But I think what's going to happen is you're going to have such a big Kurdish uprising in Turkey that, you know, it's going to, that I think that's the game that's going to, if anything, on the back channels, that's what the Russians would do, is basically if you destabilize our borders and our allies will destabilize yours, right? So the Kurds are basically caught in limbo right now. So I think that will definitely lead to an uprising. Saudi Arabia, again, getting their asses handed to them by the Houthis, backed by Iran. So with the Iranians fighting a kind of one-sided proxy war, if you think about it. Basically, Iran and Saudi Arabia, you might as well consider, are at war right now. Saudi Arabia is pumping oil, and they're not going to cut back. It's more than just undermining fracking. It's more about than that. Uh, but right now, it's kind of not working anymore. For I believe the intention was to undermine the Russian energy sector and the Iranian energy sector. But it doesn't matter. Why? Because the biggest, best customer you could possibly get, Russia or China, is now buying more oil from Russia than they are from Saudi Arabia. That said, the Chinese have a lot of investment in Saudi Arabia, but you can see that they know the future of Saudi Arabia is probably not going to be pretty bleak and probably get overthrown in a war, because right now the Saudis can't seem to do anything. They're getting their asses kicked by the Houthis, even with state-of-the-art U.S. equipment. So with that said, the Chinese, I know they're even backing the Saudis to a point to protect their oil fields and stuff like that. So the Chinese are probably looking at this, that we're going to lose our oil fields at some point, therefore we'll go with the Russians, so that if it happens, we're not caught with our pants down, right? So that's what's happened there. And we'll have to wait and see exactly how this all plays out. But I think Saudi Arabia's days are numbered. I said it a couple of years ago. Again, a lot of the things I say come true. I just never know when they're going to, because you can kind of clearly connect the dots and see what the plans are, right? Now, the thing too, where it gets very hairy in Syria with the Turkish invasion amongst the other allied groups that are coming in. This can also include French, British, and German troops. If they get striked by a get killed in a Russian airstrike, that could put us pretty much on the brink. That's how close it can get. So what will have to happen with Turkey is either Turkey's going to go this alone and be alienated, and at that point the question of NATO is, Turkey and NATO might come up. And I mean, there's a couple of ways you can look at this. Turkey's playing a very dangerous game, or they've decided to go with the Russians. Here's my theory. They're playing saber rattling with the Russians to get NATO nervous, to kick them out of NATO, so once they kick out of NATO, they switch sides. You see what I mean? That's one possibility. Or B, they're just batshit crazy and trying to get us into the Third World War. So, it can go many different ways. We never know how dirty this game really is. I mean, all sides could be in on it, or it's a free-for-all. I'm more inclined to believe it's a free-for-all, unfortunately. Because if it was all sides in on it, at least it's never going to go to the point of complete, utter annihilation of the entire planet. But, that said, if Turkey gets repelled back by the Syrian forces with the Russian air power, and the Russians have made it very clear they're going to back the Syrians, then that will really push the Turks way back. You have to understand, the Russians have basically used so much air power that they've destroyed so much of the ISIS economy with Russia, or with Turkey, that is actually hurting the Turkish economy, plus the sanctions from Russia. So basically Russia's squeezing Turkey pretty good. Again, you shot down one 1960s Su-24 and killed 2 of our pilots, we're going to wreck your economy, we're going to destroy your country, and we're just going to let it rip itself apart with uprisings from the Kurds. And that's what's going on there. Now, here in Canada, Justin Trudeau is going to be pulling out the air power in a couple of weeks. It's now confirmed, and we'll be bringing in troops. I do not like this idea. I'm kind of an all-or-none guy. Either you have your guys there backed with air power and tanks and what they need, or you take them out of the theater, because if our guys get into trouble, the best Air Force in the world to protect the Canadian guys on the ground is the Canadian Air Force. Doesn't mean other Air Forces can't do it, but if we're trying to get translation between a Turkish Air Force to come to our aid, a lot of things can be lost in translation. The operations are different. Even the U.S. operations, they operate differently than the Canadians. Therefore, Trudeau is putting our guys in harm's way. More than necessary. That said, we'll be delegated to a training only, and we are keeping our spy planes. Like, tell you the truth, most of the coalition forces don't really care much about our CF-18s. That's more just like a political football to throw around. to demonize Trudeau. But what they really wanted us to keep in, and we are keeping in, is our Aurora CP-140 spy planes, which are also maritime hunter killers, that type of thing. They want those in there. Why? Because of the S-400s and stuff like that. So to be able to see what the Russians are doing, these are airplanes that are very sought after worldwide. Sometimes when the British need help hunting Russian submarines, they call in our guys. So Canada, we don't have a big force, but we do have really good equipment. Under the Harper years, it did pretty well. Plus, with Canadian innovation, we tend to revamp things to our own. We'll buy U.S. technology and then revamp it to our own thing, and it's all integrated with NATO and everything like that. So, which has its strengths and weaknesses there too. I'm not saying it's the best in the world, but it's definitely something that they want those aircrafts to stay, and they are. That said, if you haven't caught the BBC fear mongering, which I'm looking at this, World War III thing that they were talking about over Lavatia, basically, when you watch this, the first thing you can see is the connection they're trying to make with the Ukraine. However, there's a few hints in there. If you're really watching it, this thing might actually be a subliminal message to the Russians, or to the world elite, saying this is how far we've taken it. And we'll say and I don't want to ruin it for you, but basically it's a handful of people in the war room deciding whether we have the Third World War or not against Russia. And they pose all these scenarios and everything like that, and it almost mirrors everything that's going on in Ukraine, and metaphorically, and it almost goes to everything that would happen in metaphorically in that's going on in Syria. And the end result is what they're saying is that if this, and again, I'm just speculating here because I have no proof of this, but if they're sending a message to the world, at least what they're telling us is that the Russians have just called the bluff. So that means they're telling the Russians, no, we're not going to have a nuclear exchange. Through this BBC report. Remember, BBC is a propaganda machine. They're not going to put this stuff out there unless they're trying to build people up to get ready to accept a war. Yes, this was a very Putin bad. And we know that the Swedes are out there, and it's not like the Swedes don't have enough problems of their own right now with the migrant crisis, but they were out there saying, hey, yes, we might be fighting the Russians in a few years. And what does the typical Russian response? Well, they sent out a bunch of Tu-22Ms this week doing mock drills as if they were going to invade Sweden. Balling the shit out of Sweden. So that's the way the Russians play it, right? So they're like, oh no, we're not doing nothing new, and they just kind of, it's saber rattling at that point, right? The S-400 missile systems are building up on the borders of Russia too. I mean, well, it's not really on the border. I mean, these things have a very long reach. And one thing in this BBC they talked about is the S4 BBC show. They talked about the S-400 missile system and how complicated it is, and how hard to strike this thing would cause World War III. Because you have to understand, the S-400, S-500 missile systems and S-300 missile system is made up of a whole, like you would take basically a whole squadron of fighters to attack this thing, because there's so many people. There are up to 30 pieces of equipment to these things, right? And we're talking trucks and rockets and mobile and radar. And it's a very complicated system, the best in the world. NATO still doesn't really know how to go against this thing because they haven't turned it on. That's what I think the Russian jet that got shot down was by Turkey, was to get them to turn the darn thing on so they could figure out how they're jamming the radar of the Allies, how we don't know how they're doing it yet. And because of this thing, the Russians they're not gonna turn that thing on unless it's imminent, because they know that's what NATO wants. So they're not stupid. They got these things all through the Arctic, and the Russians right now are building up through the Arctic big time as well. And I'll get that in a second. But what I was going to say about what they were mentioning in this BBC show was two things that are going on right as we're speaking. Remember, in a previous, I mentioned Kaliningrad in the previous, or maybe the last few World War III updates, that the Russians were building up there with the Iskander. They're going to be bringing in Iskander missiles and stuff like that. Well, the Iskander missile gets spoken about in Kaliningrad again because it would, the BBC did try to keep this as factual and realistic as possible. But that's the thing. It was so realistic with their scenario that it's almost eerie, like they're sending a message to the world elites, or maybe covertly to the Russians, saying if we war gamed it, it turns into this, and this is how far we're willing to go. Now, at the end of it, maybe the Brits were just saying, making it look like they were going to be the more chivalrous of people and saying, yes, we'll take out your military targets, but we're not going to attack your civilians. I think that's bullshit. I think once the birds fly, they all fly. That type of thing. So it's kind of like an all or none. It's like it's like half pregnant or partial circumcision. There's no halfway. It's all or none, right? And so that's what that BBC one. Watch it. Is it some sort of a message? I don't know. These things do happen on TV. If you look at the 1950s and 1960s, there was tons of propaganda on the TV to send kind of coded message to the Russians to let them know what was going on. It's all this cloak and dagger, 007 spy via spy stuff that the average person will catch. To them, they're just watching a fear porn movie or documentary of what could possibly happen, but they don't realize that BBC is a propaganda machine, same way RT today is a propaganda machine, same way the CBC here in Canada is a propaganda machine, any news outlet in the States is like Fox and CNN. These are all propaganda machines. And of course CNN is out there using basically footage from the Russians for airstrikes and passing it off as I don't know if it was CNN or Fox or one of those guys. Anyway, they're all pretty much the same anyway, but they were using Russian air footage in Syria and telling the U.S. public that, hey, you know what, this is what we're doing, bombing targets in Syria. But it's not, I mean, if you look at the HUD display and the FLIR camera display, you can clearly see it's a Russian, it's Russian writing in there and stuff like that. It's not in English. It's not American. So they're using that footage now. Maybe it's just, okay, well, we need something to throw in the reel. But the thing is the question is let's say, just for argument's sake, that okay, well, we got the Russian footage because it's out there and it's easy to get, and we have 3 minutes to put it on the air, and that, that type of thing. Okay, that's one thing. But then the other question is, how come they can't find a whole bunch of U.S. video footage? I mean, if they're striking ISIS all over the place, which they're not, I mean, it's pretty clear now. I think, U.S. Navy pilots are getting really pissed. They're starting to they must be figuring it out that, we're not really at war with ISIS. We're supporting ISIS. We're at war with Assad. It's almost so openly obvious now, particularly with the emissions of the Turks, right? They're not holding back. They're not lying. They're saying, yeah, we're going after Assad. Even if they don't say it in quite plain language, they tell you who they're going to attack. And if you look at who they're attacking Assad. So it's kind of like that. This is why the Turks have become kind of a political nightmare for the U.S. foreign policy, which is way out of control, way beyond dangerous right now. And the question people are going to have to ask, particularly Europe and particularly, all the NATO members, is, are we willing to die for the Turks? Same thing like the Ukraine. Are we willing to go to war for the Ukraine? And in the BBC thing, I'll make one more point on that. They talk about Latvia. Now, remember Obama was talking about Latvia a few months ago? How he was worried about, a Russian uprising and takeover of Latvia, and that, that we were going to defend Latvia and stuff like that. Well, in this BBC program, they said something very interesting about Latvia. One of the girls in the war room, of course, trying to be the voice of reason, sits there. I mean, you have to understand, it's propaganda, so they have to make them look like they're all reasonable, right? But when we're talking about thermonuclear war, there's no such thing as reasonable. But anyway, the one lady says, okay, think of what you're considering here. Going to have a thermonuclear exchange when the entire population of Latvia is like 2 million people. So we're going to kill 8 billion people pretty much on the planet for 2 million people. Is that is that kind of is it worth that, And these are the questions. So maybe what they're saying to the Russians is, no, we're not, just stay out of Latvia and we won't do that, but we're not willing to go to have a nuclear exchange on that. Again, you taking BBC propaganda at face value, nothing to back my theory here, but when you watch it, it's scary how many similarities that we're seeing going on in the world right at this moment. Now, we know the economy being one of the biggest things, it is a nightmare right now for everybody. The Canadian dollar's going down, oil, even with the dropping barrels of oil in price, some of the barrels of oil are actually worth more than the oil in the barrel. And thing is we're not seeing the drop at the pumps here. Now, what Obama's doing is, as oil drops, he's taxing the oil. Now, I don't know how well that's working out, but that's what they're doing. But it doesn't really matter, because you have to understand what's happening is the petrodollar is dying. Meaning at it's going to happen very quickly. Maybe again bringing in another TV show thing. I didn't watch it myself, but I saw the clip of the X-Files when they talk about the bankers' holiday. And all these things could be signaling to the world elites get ready for it. And again, if you listen to guys like George Soros in the past week or two, talking about basically economic collapse, we're right at the doorstep of it. Again, doesn't make it on mainstream media, or the mainstream media is playing it down. But I haven't, even on the mainstream media, I haven't heard any good economic news at all in 2 months or 3 months maybe. Yeah, I mean, every day all they're talking about is how the energy sector in Alberta is going to take another. Again, they're expecting another 85,000 job losses. Our unemployment rate is moving down at a time when our kindergarten kindergarten teacher feminist male feminist prime minister is basically spending like a drunken sailor on really stupid things. But anyway, I digress. Now, on top of that, up in the Arctic, and something I said, we will be shooting at the Russians over the Arctic. Just, it's a matter of when. All I can say is pray for cold weather in the Arctic. Make sure that sucker stays froze for the next 100 years. Why? That way we don't kill each other over the resources. But if that Arctic opens up, trust me, there will be conflict. And the Russians have now really stepped up. The last past couple of years, basically stepping up all these Arctic bases, but they got drills going on there left, right, and center, and they're bringing in a lot of equipment now. And they've got ground troops up in the Arctic to be able to respond not only to air threats, but to have a few brigades of guys up there with Arctic vehicles. We have Arctic vehicles here too in Canada, basically to be mobile over the Arctic. So you have air, land, and sea covered in the Arctic by the Russians currently. Us, not so much. Now, the problem with us here in Canada is we don't have a lot of warships anymore. Most of our warships are, pretty dated, and most of them are now being decommissioned. And our new shipbuilding program may be canceled by Trudeau. So I have no idea how in the hell we're going to defend against the Russians without ships. Artillery will get us probably a bit further than probably warships to a degree, but those warships can strike us from pretty far out. So our coastal defenses right now are pretty much down, but one natural coastal defense that we have up here in Canada is distance. From the top of the country to the bottom of the country, you're looking minimum 600 miles. So that's 1,000 kilometers. What that means is that a Russian invasion can't come through the Arctic. Like it can't come down that way. They can move on to there, but they'd never get. It would take so much resources for them to be mobile to come down from that way. But they could set up bases on northern Canada if they should decide to take it. So that said, we are well equipped. We just don't have enough equipment, and we're in liberal years, so the military, the Canadian military, is going to suffer big time because of that. So that's what's going up on the Arctic. The other things to keep an eye on, again, the economy is the big one. We're in February, and I said February would be a month to watch, and it is turning out to be kind of the February I thought. Economically, we're seeing people, running scared. Banks have now put limits, not in every country, but just about all the countries, to make a maximum withdrawal of $5,000 a day, which is not technically a bank holiday. Most people can't do that. But if you take out more than $5,000 in a day, you're going to get a visit from the police in some countries. They don't want you to take your money out of the bank. Now, the reason why they put it at $5,000 a day is not for the average Joe Schmo. They're doing this for big-time investors who want to take their money out and put it into other things, such as gold, silver type of thing. And I'm not trying to sell anybody gold or silver. I don't have any gold, silver my own. I'm too poor. I'm more of a person that believes in bread and bullets. That's just my thing. You do you. But the thing is that at the end of the day, you're not going to have enough food put away no matter who you are, even self-included. So make sure you buy seeds too. Because when this all plays out, if we don't go to war, we starve to death. If we go to war, we die from something else, right? So there's kind of a bad to worse kind of scenario. But if you do have seeds and do have stuff like that, I'm not saying war is going to break out tomorrow morning, but it could. We're in that kind of a time where if the Turks and the Saudis and all those allied countries go into Syria, they're going to be shooting at Syrian army. The Syrian army has the Russian Air Force in there. That means they're going to be met with other air defense systems. They're also going to be met with NATO airplanes. So when the Turkish airplanes come into Syria, and this is what I think the Russians are going to do, is they'll probably lure the Turks into Syria. They're going to lure them in. They're going to lure them in deep. and make it so obvious that Article 5 can't be invoked because it was a direct attack. They're probably going to sacrifice a lot of Syrian troops to do this. They're going to say they're attacking Syrian troops. They just killed 1,100, 1,200, 1,500 troops here, there. We had no duty, or we had no other option, but we had to stop the Turkish aggression. They're 30 miles into Syria. That NATO has no claim here. They don't have UN support. They're in there illegally. The international community can't do nothing, and the Russians are just going to have a field day with them. But what they really want to do is lure in Turkish air power. Why? Because they got the Su-35Ss in there, and these things are the latest and greatest for the Russians. And I have a feeling those things would fly. Maybe the F-16Cs and the F-16s that the Turks have might be slightly more maneuverable in some way, but at altitude, those Su-35s are going to be a real handful. Plus, they have longer range, they carry more weapons, and they have a much more powerful radar and a jam-proof radar. Meaning, if they come around on the ass end of the Turks are going to either have to fly their way around the Russians, which might maneuver them long enough to make these pilots, if they try to avoid conflict, what they might actually do is push them further into Syria, get shot down by air defense. More likely, what I would think the Russians would do is make them fly to try to get, like, they would basically, the Russians will hug the border of Turkey and Syria far enough out of the Turkish air defense, but basically keep blocking off with longer range airplanes such as the Su-35 and Su-34s. They could basically force the Turks to fly deeper into Syria till they run out of fuel, or shoot them down. But all they'll have to do is wait till the Turks get aggressive. If they force them into Syria or lure them into Syria, that's how they're going to. But they have to wait till the Turks shoot first, and then at that point, it's game over, Turks. They might lose a few Russian pilots. Again, Putin is willing to sacrifice a couple of guys. The prize is much bigger. They have to look bad on the world. Right now, Turkey looks bad on the world stage, and the Turks don't care. But NATO does. It's all about public perception. So if the Turks are doing the stupid things, they're going to get booted out of NATO, or NATO is not going to respond. And they have to kick Turkey out of NATO. Here's why. Because if they don't, it delegitimizes the whole purpose of NATO. So it's either A, Turkey straightens up, flies right, pardon the pun, or B, they fall in line. They fall in line, or they get kicked out of NATO. Because if they don't kick them out of NATO, and trust me, this will work brilliant for the Russians, because once they're out of NATO, Turkey dies. They're going to die a horrible death. The Russians will run right over top of them, and there's nothing the rest of the world can do about it. Why? They're not a NATO member. It's the main reason why we didn't go to war in the Ukraine. Latvia, we might go to war for, because they're part of NATO, right? So that type of thing. That's what that whole BBC program was about. But you get the idea. The Russians are trying to maneuver the Turks into a position that makes them a liability for NATO. Very clever when you think about it. It's a very long con. And the Turks, maybe they're willing participants, or they're just that gullible, or they're just that crazy. I don't know. It could be one, it could be the other. But I can guarantee you, once you make one NATO member fall, the rest are going to fall like a stack of dominoes. Because it's so clear now that the Russians are the ones, and I'm not a Putin fan, you guys know that. I know this man is corrupt. I know this man, you can't trust him. You don't know how dirty this guy might be, let alone how dirty he is. But the thing is, the Russians are not trying to get us into World War III. They have lots of opportunities. They have lots of opportunities to start a war. But they're not starting the war because the prize is bigger if they don't start a war. So, that said, you have to understand the Rothschild banking system is bleeding right now. All the money's starting to come back to that system. Hyperinflation, right now the high US dollar is very artificial. It's extremely artificial. And because of that, it's dangerous. It's toxic and it's dangerous. Remember, the United States does not manufacture hardly anything anymore. They have a death and debt-based economy. Now, I'm not bashing all my American viewers. You heard me say this. I'm picking on the government, not the people. But you have to understand, it is U.S. foreign policy that we're following. And again, people like Zebru Brzezinski, this man is a complete, utter psychopath. He's crazy. The same with Henry Kissinger and stuff like that. And Henry Kissinger, I think, is kind of playing both sides right now. It seems, again, we don't know what he's talking with Putin about, but usually as soon as he talks to Putin, almost a week or so later, something crazy happens in the world, and the game goes up higher. So, and with George Soros being the financier of death and destruction, again, look what he's done to the Ukraine. I wish the Ukrainian people would wake up and I get it. Ethnic Ukrainians don't like ethnic Russians, fine. But your real enemy is Zionism. So you might want to kind of check that and, band together. But then again, we don't know how corrupt that war is either. I mean, again, is the right sector really, and Azov Battalion really fighting on behalf of the Anglo-American Empire, or are they basically bought off by the Russians? I mean, think about it. Every time they make an advancement, they give up the ground they take, and they go back. So it's hard to say. We don't know. I don't think they are because of who backed them in the first place, George Soros. But then again, order from chaos, keep the war going. It's the same as ISIS. These guys, again, airdrops of supplies. The Turks are bitching about it. The Iraqis are bitching about it. The Iranians are bitching about it. Like, it's the emperor has no clothes now. And all this for Syria. But people, they know the war is a sham. And again, people are asking, okay, well, we understand that they want to overthrow Assad, but the question is why? Well, I do agree with Paul Craig Roberts and Joe Skousen on this, that Iran is the only country in the Middle East that kind of has its own weapons program that is not, hooked up to a Rothschild banking system. And that's the threat. That's the threat. But I think it's bigger than that, because there's also the fact that once they overthrow Iran and take out Syria, they pretty much control the Middle East. Once they control the Middle East, they can easily attack Russia and China from there. Whatever means they want. So Russia and China would be completely isolated. But again, who's going to jump sides? I think the Saudis gambled and they lost. Again, I think they made that gamble in 2012, and that as soon as they said it, I remember hearing them saying it. It was one of the royal family came out and said, "Yeah, we're going to be selling oil outside the U.S. dollar." Accepting payments other than U.S. dollars by 2022 to 2025. It's a death sentence. It's a death sentence. So with Libya, the buildup in Libya, who knows what's going to happen there? Yeah, you can see it's just war, and more war. And yes, it is all on behalf of Israel. And if you look at the United States right now, the entire Congress is Zionists. Neocon Zionists, whether they're left or right, it doesn't matter. GOP, Democrats, they all can't wait to go to war for Israel. Every one of them calling for war is pretty much a Zionist. And not all Zionists are Jews, some are Christians, but you get it. John McCain's upset that his false flags didn't work, that type of thing. So we're seeing how mad, these are literally insane people. Which brings me to, I guess, my last part of this video. Now, this one might go down the rabbit hole. I usually don't do that. I usually try to stay in the so-called real world. And I know a lot of people have a lot of different things that they call, like Illuminati or stuff like that. And some people say, why don't you mention that stuff? Well, I refer to the Illuminati basically as just really corrupt people. Okay. Now, supernatural part of it, I don't really go down that part of the rabbit hole. Secret order, well, most cartels are secret orders. You know what I mean? Like, that's the whole thing. Yes, you might know about the club, but to get in the club, you might not know who the members are. You have to have the secret handshake, whatever. So most people can grasp the idea of a bank robber or a serial killer, even a corrupt politician, but a homicidal policymaker with U.S. foreign policy, complete genocidal maniacs, and we've seen them throughout history. Stalin, Lenin, Mao, Pol Pot, you name them. These people do exist. Hitler, they do exist. They do kill people. And so that part of it I get. And even with the United Nations being basically communism, one world government, they can't wait to have the 2018 one world currency, one world police force, one world spy agency, one world media, one world education system. The list goes on. One world government. The list goes on and on and on. So if you want to refer to them as the Illuminati, that's fine. I think it's multifaceted. I think it's a lot of different players in there. And they arguably say that about 6,300 people, give or take a few hundred, run the world. And they say it runs off of a family of about 13 major families, which again, that's not really conspiracy, because you can track these families and their royal bloodlines or whatever. Now, whatever kind of, I don't believe they're lizard people or anything like that. That's, again, I don't go down that thing. But these are corrupt people that want to stay in power. So that's why I call them corrupt politicians. Terms like New World Order or Illuminati, I don't use that much. I prefer to say corrupt people because it really resonates with most people. So if you think I'm not bringing it up because I'm afraid to be ridiculed or whatever, no, I call out Zionism all the time. I call out whoever's doing what. I use names, statements, stuff like that all the time. But that's the stuff I want to stick with for the most part. The reason why they do what they do, that I haven't quite figured out. They've got the money, they've got the power, they control all the corporations. They can, they own all the resources. And so, what's it really about? I have no idea. I do understand it is probably has something to do with empirism, meaning if you look at the world busted into two, the Anglo-American Empire versus the Eurasian Pacific Empire, that makes sense. That it's basically this empire fighting that empire. But it could be more than that, who knows? I don't know what else I can really say about it, but I think what needs to happen, and I'm just one man, I can't do it all myself, because I do call for the arrest of these people. If there's any good law enforcement and lawyers out there, one charge, crimes against humanity, stop these people before they get us all killed. We might already be too far. The ball that's in motion might be already too far. One last thing I'll say about that BBC program is the way it ended, they did leave the ball in the Russian court. And that might be a signal, who knows? I'm speculating on that, take that with a grain of salt. It is, watch it for yourself, you decide for yourself. But the other thing I would say too is it's not always about what you believe. It could be about what they believe. Now, we know people will kill each other over religion. That's been going on for thousands and thousands of years. So you can understand that concept. Now, there's other, and this is all speculation. It's just looking for motive here, why they're doing what they're doing. Psychopath only goes so far. Satanist even only goes so far. Because the nihilism that they're showing is like, it's going to affect them too. They're going to die in this cause too. So it has to be, they're doing this for something big. What it is, I have no idea. Now, what I might say is this. History has a lot of stuff in it pertaining to the Bible and stuff like that. And I'm not a Jesus freak at all. People know that. And I'm not atheist or whatever. I keep an open mind about everything. But let's go back to the Third Crusade for a second. And I'm just throwing this out as a hypothetical. We know the Saracens may have burnt the cross that Jesus died on. Some people will debate that, but we'll say that's fact, okay? What if they didn't burn the cross, that part of the cross? How many men would be willing to die to get that thing? We're talking thousands, millions. How many would die to destroy that thing? We're talking millions, right? Now, I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm just saying this is a hypothetical. It could be something like that, something we don't understand. So they've got all the power, they've got all the resources, they control everything, they control the banking, they control the media, they control the population. What more could they want? They can even do it in cooperation with so-called other empires. And they could all make off like bandits. So it doesn't explain what they're doing. Even if they're Satanists, again, I'm not saying they are. There is a lot of, the New World Orders do seem to have their kind of Satanistic rituals and stuff like that. Maybe they're occultists. Who knows? There's so many ways it can go. But we know they use symbolism and stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff that kind of pertains to Egypt, stuff like that. We are talking about the Middle East. There could be things there. There's even rumors of a Stargate there. I'm not saying that's what it is. But again, it's not what I believe. It's maybe that's what they think it is. If it's that ridiculous, maybe. But we don't know what they're really fighting over. And this is what makes everything so dangerous. Now, I throw that stuff out there not to delegitimize my reports or anything like that, because I know some people, as soon as they hear that stuff, oh, okay, well, everything you just said means nothing. No, I'm talking about real-world events. Everything I talked about in this episode up to this point is stuff that's been happening pretty much within the past week. And, a little bit longer back, too. And if you've been following these World War III updates, you're probably coming to the conclusion that I'm coming to, that there's something that think about it, a one-world currency, and I was thinking about this the other day. It doesn't really make sense. They already have a currency. They control all the currencies. The Eurozone, that's your one-world currency template right there. They don't even have to get rid of it violently. They can just switch it over to a global. They've already got the North American Union. They've already got the TPP pretty much signed and ready to go. They've got all this stuff. They've got all these trade deals. It's already one system. To streamline it, it's just a flick of a switch for them. Change the dies in the printing press in all the countries, match them up, and away you go. But they're not doing that. That would be the easy way to do it. People would bitch about it, sure, but it would be so easy. They don't have to do all this death and destruction. There's no reason to do it. They could have bargained their way with the Russians. They could have bargained their way with the Chinese. They're after something else. I don't think it's power and money like we think it is. I think there's something else they're after that we don't understand yet. Now, I think at some point we're going to understand what it is. So, what we need to do, what I think we need to do, number one, we need to arrest all these people and put them away. But it seems like, for some strange reason, these people are above the law to the point that there never seems to be anybody challenging them. How is that possible? Like, influence or not, you're telling me every police officer in the world is completely so loyal to their job and so afraid of losing their job that they won't stand out about these people? Like nobody will stand up to them? Only people in Iceland stand up to the bankers and the corrupt politicians? Does that make sense to you? It doesn't make sense to me. I'm not underestimating humanity or overestimating humanity. I think they're after something else. It's just I don't know what it is. So I think what we do have to do is make a list of names and photos. And here's why photos are going to be important. If this comes to a head, okay, and the grid goes down and we're down and out, you want to have a wanted list. This guy wanted. And you want clear, top quality photos of these people printed out. Like in the Nuremberg trials, only difference between it now and Nazi Germany is when they were hunting down people for the Nuremberg trials, they had to use eyewitness, which wasn't good enough because eyewitnesses, people aged, stuff like that, was really hard to tell who was who. But what we need to do is document these people, their faces, what they could possibly look like, how they would age, actually everything like that. Most of these people are old anyway, but you get the idea. Names, where they live, who they are, who their next kin, who they do business with. We need to start making those files and printing them out in a booklet so that if the grid goes down, we can still find these people. But I think they're after something else that we just don't understand yet. And I'm not going to speculate any more than that. I know a lot of people will run wild with the theories there, but you've got to think of the insanity that we're living in. Yes, I understand wars are fought for religion, greed, power, money, stuff like that, but there are limits. And these don't make sense. They just do not add up. You would not do all this for a little bit of oil in the desert that you could have negotiated. Say, hey, we'll refine it. Oh, they could do this in all the African countries. Hey, we'll refine this. We'll do that. We'll do that. Your people get the jobs. We make money. You make money. Everybody lives happily. Just let us control it. That could have been negotiated with the corruption of these countries. That could have been negotiated without any death, without anybody dying. Very easy, much less painful, much cheaper. Even depopulation. There's a reason why they want to do this. Genocide could be part of it, sure. Psychopathic, definitely. Sociopathic, but power, money, they've already got all that. What is it they're after? So I don't know. I'm trying to think myself. It's not what I believe, but what are they after? Like to put in all that much effort to pretty much to destroy the world for what? What is so important that you have to destroy the world? And it's always the same players: Kissinger, Brzezinski, Rothschilds, Soros, all these people. Rockefellers, Rothschilds, all these people. Bushes, Clintons. Same people all the time. House of Windsor, and the list goes on and on and on. What are they after? Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. So if you like this kind of content, please consider making a donation to the channel. Thank you very much to everybody who has. Rate, subscribe, share, comment, like, be true to yourself, be true to others. Always do the right thing, and have yourselves a great day. G'day, hi, and welcome. Alright, I was going to do a World War III, but everything in the world seems to be calm and fine. Bankers have been arrested. All the psychopaths have seemed to have called away from the war rhetoric, so it looks like everything's going fine. There's nothing to worry about whatsoever. No, don't worry. We're always moments of being away from being blown off the planet, and today is no exception. So, I've been, kind of watching what's been unfolding. in the past week or so. We're really at, I got so much to cover on this one that I don't like to cover every little thing every day because I like to wait till I see it build into something that you can really see clearly, connect the dots like I've been doing on these. And I always tell people, don't be afraid to watch some of my older World War III updates, even if they're a couple of years old. Some of the stuff I've been saying back then is relevant now. I'm going to start with China has just bought a stock exchange in the United States, something maybe New York Stock Exchange or something. Not Wall Street, but something along that line. So they just did that. Iran has just ditched the U.S. dollar, meaning they're not going to sell their oil in U.S. currency, which is the same thing that got Muammar Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein killed. Maybe some other things in there too, but that's the big one, right? On top of that, Russia and China are now the two. Russia's China's biggest oil trading partner, and so I'm sure Iran will get in on that at some point too. But basically, they've just bypassed Saudi Arabia. The Russians have just basically ditched Saudi oil they're taking the crown from the Saudis for oil to China. Now I'm sure China will buy oil from everybody, but you can see them moving away. Sorry, a little dry here, but there's also, while this is going on, our three stooges are out there. Your Henry Kissinger, who went and visited Putin. Again, every time he goes visit Putin, you never hear what the meeting was about. And Kissinger is one of the big players in global disaster. He's one of the most evil men on the planet. Him, George Soros, and of course our other lunatic that was in the basement that Ronald Reagan told not to let out of the basement, is Zebru Brzezinski. Well, he's out there talking about nuking, doing preemptive strikes on Russia. This guy is just a complete nightmare of a disaster. He's the one who wrecked Afghanistan. He wrecked. This guy, Iraq. These guys are the main three guys that seem to be doing the bidding of, and who's above them, I don't know. But they do call the shots for the new American century policy and U.S. foreign policy. Kissinger seems to be doing strange things the past couple of years, where he's saying things like Israel will no longer exist as a country in 10 to 15 years. George Soros, about a year or so ago, was talking about how China must be the new economic growth for the future, and then a couple of weeks ago he's talking about how we're going to go to war with China, and how he's also out there pretending that he had no idea that this was coming, but it looks like the next economic collapse is going to be 10 times worse, 9 to 10 times worse than the last one. So we're talking extinction level event for a lot of people around the world. Might hit here last, but if you're in the United States and over here in Canada as well, remember we do 80% trade with the United States, but you also have to keep in mind that China, again, they're buying as much gold as they can to back their currency, which is now a reserve currency. This is happening extremely fast. I mean, this is past tense stuff we're talking about. Not what they're going to do, but what they are doing. And this is putting us into a very scary trajectory. And I'm not fear-mongering, I'm just keeping it real. So we know North Korea fired off one of its big pop rockets there last week on Saturday or Sunday. I think it was Saturday. Last Saturday from the making of this video, and they're talking about firing another rocket, basically doing a fifth nuclear test and stuff like that. When they're going to do this, I'm not exactly sure. They're kind of a bit unpredictable on their timelines, but the thing is they're doing it now. Apparently, that rocket launched some sort of a satellite for the North Koreans. What that could be, who knows, right? It's like, it could be a weapon, it could be a communication satellite, a spy satellite, it could be many things. It could be Sputnik 2, but they did launch it. Now, Japan is still standing by its rhetoric of, if anything comes too close to us, we're shooting it down. So again, Japan is on kind of, not red alert, but high alert for North Korea, so that if North Korea launches anything any missile that goes their way, they're shooting it down, same as the South Koreans. And while this is going on, where the really hot spot right now seems to be playing out is definitely Syria. Turkey is gone, I think, full retard on this one. They want to invade about a 30-mile strip along the border of Turkey and Syria and move in quite substantially far in, which will put them in proximity of the Russian airbase, which you can pretty much figure out what could possibly happen there. But it gets worse than that. They're not going in to fight ISIS. it sounds like pretty much openly they're admitting they're going in to fight alongside ISIS. Again, moderate rebels, right? So in other words, they're going in to fight Assad. Pretty much that's what they're saying. On top of this, you may have Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Jordan is kind of on the fence. They always kind of have been, and I don't think Israel's going to jump in on it, but you know they're going to be in there somewhere. Now the thing about this is the statement that was said from some Syrian commanders is that if they come in, and the Iraqis might be coming in too, but the Iraqis are actually coming in to fight ISIS. So at some point the Iraqis are going to have to choose. Now they know they're in a rock and a hard place, but they have to choose. But the Syrian generals and Assad and said, don't send your guys in because they're going to be slaughtered in, you're going to be sending a lot of body bags back to Turkey. Now the thing is why would Turkey do this? Other than the obvious that they're batshit crazy. Well, it's simple. If they can overthrow Assad's troops, it makes the claim for NATO to go in because Assad once again will have lost control of the country, meaning that they can no longer handle the situation themselves, therefore the international community must come in. Now, you have to understand there's stuff going on in Syria. It's not about the women and children or Assad being a dictator. They didn't care about him for how many years, and all of a sudden out of nowhere they care about him? No, there's definitely a lot of things. If you've been following this channel, you get an idea of some of the things that they're after, but there might be other things that we don't know about yet. But we do know that it is the stepping stone to going after Iran. And again, once they overtake Iran in the Middle East, it's pretty clear after that Russia and China are next. So this is why the Russians and the Chinese are kind of, well, the